We grow when we give.
We grow when we give.
We grow when we give.
Nosotros crecemos cuando damos.
We grow when we give.
与えるとき成長する。
We grow when we give.
Welcome to ROG, Return on Generosity, a podcast celebrating generosity at work. Not financial giving, giving valuable time, alternative perspectives, and genuine collaboration. Welcome to ROG, Return on Generosity podcast. I'm your host, Shannon Cassidy. Today, we're honored to have Tim Leake, founder, CEO, and crusher of Soulcrushers at Lightbulb. Tim helps people be more successful at their work by making that work more enjoyable. With his team and company, Lightbulb, he works with senior executives and leaders to help them solve important challenges in hours, not months, and has a load of fun doing it. We're going to learn more about that today. He's been facilitating workshops with executives for over 15 years. He was part of the C-suite and as part of the largest independent advertising agency in the US for a decade. And he began his career as a copywriter and creative director. Tim is an in-demand public speaker. He's been featured multiple times at Cannes Lions, South by Southwest, TEDx, and many other global stages. What I appreciate most about you, Tim, is your courage. The concert that you had with Jeff Tan, put on about a year ago, is a great example of trying something new with heart and courage. Welcome to ROG, Tim.
Thank you, Shannon. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's so great to finally meet you. I've been enjoying your work in preparation for our conversation today. So with that piece about your concert with Jeff Tan, could you tell us a little bit more about how that started? And for our listeners who don't know what I'm talking about, check out the show notes. There's a link to a TED Talk that they did together.
Yeah, so that ultimately became, it was a TEDx talk maybe about a year and a half ago, almost 2 years, I suppose. And with my friend Jeff Tan, who's the director of business envisioning at Microsoft. And he's a buddy of mine that we met, interestingly enough, in the south of France. So it was during the Cannes Lions Festival of Creativity. And I had been speaking that year. And then there was a side project, like a side panel. And we were on the panel together. And it was like at a chateau up in like just this gorgeous chateau that you actually had to take a shuttle to. And so Jeff and I were on the same shuttle, and then we were chatting. We're like, oh, we're both going to be on the same panel, and oh, we're in the same industry. And we were both talking about wanting to work on a book, and we're like, oh, that's cool. And then we realized I live in Los Angeles, and he had just moved to Santa Monica from New York City. So we're like, we should be friends.
Yeah.
And that was probably, it was before the pandemic. So that was 6 years ago, I think, at this point. And ever since, we've been just really great friends and partners to help each other out. So in the spirit of the return on generosity, it's always about being generous to each other. And I have opportunities that I think of for him, and he has opportunities he thinks of for me, and we hold each other accountable, and I think keep pushing. And that particular TEDx talk, so you generously call it a concert. And the title of it is Committing to Ideas That Scare You, the musical. And the musical part was the idea that scared us. And it just felt like if you're going to do a talk about committing to scary ideas and being brave and courageous in the face of an idea that feels intimidating and uncomfortable, then we wanted to deliver it in a way that felt uncomfortable. Yes. And singing and writing music is not what we do. Jeff is a better guitar player than I am, as you can see if you do watch the video. And he actually knew what harmony was, and I didn't. I was just always singing. But I think we added enough reverb to make it good. And so the fact that I think the songs come out fun, it's a shame that we didn't have the AI tools to have written the songs for us. I would have loved to have used like Suno.ai to create songs or something, but no, we actually wrote them.
I think it's even better that you wrote them.
Yeah, it turned out really fun. And I remember
you, right? I mean, that's what you were saying.
Yeah.
In it.
Yeah. And it required some work to put it together and overcoming the fear. And basically what we had like this workshop together where we were thinking of what could we talk about, and we pitched it to South by Southwest originally, and it didn't get selected there, but we created a video preview with one song in it for that
Okay.
submission.
Yeah.
And the person who was putting together the TEDx talk saw that and invited us to do it at their thing as well. So it ended up, I think, being a very good thing that it was only 12 minutes instead of
Mhm.
45 minutes in the end. But we made the
Yeah.
point just as well in a much
Yes.
shorter amount of time.
You do, and it's just a beautiful piece of art to see how you two work together to create this learning lesson slash concert for people, and you're modeling exactly what you're saying, and it's so creative, and I think just like on brand. So
Yeah.
it's something I appreciate about you, and
Oh, thank
it
you.
actually made me think like, how could I play bigger? How could I be bolder? Right. So I think it if it was intended to inspire people, it did.
Oh, that's great. I do think that's the point. And it's
Yeah.
funny. I have yet to probably eloquently communicate this in the context of when I do speaking engagements, but I have a bad habit of being absurdly ambitious with with the talk. And I did a talk with another friend of mine. This one was at South by Southwest quite a while ago, maybe 8 years ago. And the talk, as we pitched it, it was on shareability. And I think the title of the talk was if you don't share it, did it really happen? And what we said in our pitch was, and we're going to do it in a way that is inherently shareable. And we didn't know what that was going to be, right? We just said we're going to do it in a way that is inherently
We'll figure
shareable.
it out. Yeah.
And then they selected it, and much like the whole through line of the TEDx talk that I did with Jeff is you kind of, to commit to a scary idea, you just need to get locked in. And if
Yes. You
somebody
can't get
locks
out
you
of it.
in, like
Yeah.
if they book you, now you have to come up with a solution. If
Mhm.
you people do this in business, by the way. Like if you want to sell something first, and then if they buy it, you go make the thing. Don't make the
Yeah.
thing and then hope somebody buys it. That's the wrong way.
Yeah.
But because now you're locked in, and now you know somebody wants it. It's motivating too. So
Mhm.
anyway, what my partner in that talk and I did is we actually partnered with an artist collective, and a digital artist collective, and they developed an app. I don't know if that app is the right word. A
Like a QR code
platform
or a
that
platform.
we
Okay.
we created a second screen to our presentation that was on people's phones. So we had the slides at the front of the talk, and then there's a QR code and a URL, and if they scan that with their phones, they could, for every slide we were on, it was kind of like that old show Pop-Up Video. If you remember that one on
Uh-huh. Yeah.
VH1, the younger folks in your audience won't know what I'm
Won't know
talking
what
about,
that
but
is, but I do.
it's like, yeah,
Yeah.
it was basically like this running
Wow.
commentary on the slides that we were showing and what we were saying. And so sometimes we had embedded a joke in the second screen, and you'd
Mhm.
hear a laugh from the audience when we moved to the next thing, but we hadn't
Oh,
said
wow.
anything funny because they were
Yeah.
seeing the second screen. And then there were buttons on the screen that they were looking, and if they clicked that, they were share buttons that would automatically share the slide that we were showing. So I don't know if
Like
it
on
got a little meta.
social or
Yeah,
text or
exactly.
however
So
you
if
share
you
anything. Okay.
if they liked, and we tried to make almost all of our slides soundbitey so
Mhm.
that they would be something that you would want to
Wow.
share.
Yeah.
And that worked out crazily well. But I've done that. I did a thing one time where we wrote a whole book in an hour with I had the audience write a book in an hour. And that was something I did at Cannes Lions and with an organization called Think LA out here. So I love doing these like absurdly
Wow. You
ambitious
just put
things.
yourself in that arena, right?
Yes.
And you just make it happen, and you prepare.
Yeah.
So I think that's another misnomer is like people think, "Oh, wow, somebody as talented as you can just show up and do this." No, you do a
Oh,
lot of
yeah, a
preparation
lot.
so that it goes smoothly. And oh wow, it's so innovative. And when you're talking about that Cannes Lions event that you did that was live with the slides, I think like why don't people do that more often? Because very often I see people taking pictures of
Yes.
the slide deck, but
Yeah.
if you had an ability to just have that show up on your phone, that would be wiser.
It's honestly, it's something that ever since then, people were like, "What platform did you use?" And it was like, we just built it in collaboration with this digital artist.
Yeah.
And I've often thought, and haven't yet, that it would be a really cool product to go kind of build that. but because it was bespoke, that's probably why there isn't actually a technological platform to do it. We had to make it.
Yeah.
And
genius.
what I liked about it is it made using the phone. Yeah. You removed the friction from being able to share it. I don't know. This is the truth that always happens to me. Whenever I see a great slide, it's like some sort of psychic connection that the second I take out my phone and I'm about to take the picture, that means they're going to
It's
go
gone.
to the next
Yeah.
one.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And
Happens all the
it's so
time.
simple. You just click the button and it automatically loads that. So you can
Yeah.
even send it later, but it loads the slide into the tweet. And
so
yeah, it was
cool.
really fun to go back and look at how many people had shared it, because that was the point
It
of that particular
resonated.
one.
Yeah. Well, you call yourself a crusher of soul crushers. Want to know, what does that mean and why does that matter?
Yeah, it's a great. I love the phrase, and it hit me a few years ago, and it's a book I'm working on. So the book will be called Crushing the Soul Crushers. And it really is fundamentally about a self-empowering approach to making your work fun. Again, I haven't decided whether to keep that again in there or not permanently, but I do think it's rooted on the idea that whatever our work is, and I mean our actual work. Sometimes when we confuse the fact that when we say have fun at work, we think we mean work at the place of work. And that leads to cultures where you have ping pong tables and slides in the office and stuff, but then there is still a chaos, a political headaches, and just painful like frustrations of inefficiency and all of that. Whereas the truth is, if you we actually enjoy our work a lot when we can just do our work. And we so rarely are able to operate in the conditions where that is possible. So I'm going to answer this from two sides, but from what I do with Let's Lightbulb, using facilitation to help teams better collaborate, to be able to do it faster, more effectively, and have more fun doing so. A lot of that is because people were not taught to collaborate well. Like when you throw 10 people in a room and say, figure this out, and there is no structure to that, we are really bad at collaborating. Independently, we are really good at our jobs, but most meetings lead to another meeting, which leads to another meeting, and so on. And so when I say that I can help executive teams solve their problems in hours versus months, that is literal. Like these things take months before they ever happen, because we didn't figure it out in this meeting, because we didn't have any structure to it or any process to make a decision or any process to develop creative solutions behind it. And so it gets kicked to another meeting, but the next time all of us are available is in 3 weeks. And then you have that meeting, but the senior decision maker wasn't available or bailed at the last second. So you do it another 2 weeks later, and then you delegate it to a junior team and they come back, but it isn't quite right because the team that actually cares about it or has the vision wasn't involved. And this spiral of
people come and they go, and
and there ends up being 10 of those initiatives happening simultaneously on top of the quote unquote real work that needs to happen, and nothing happens. It just takes forever. And so the initiative either dies or it takes too long or created a lot of soul crushing moments in the meantime. And so I believe that what I do is helps get rid of these soul crushers. And to pull it back to the book idea, I use a metaphor of soul crushers as not being other people, because I think sometimes they say, oh, that person is crushing my soul, like that is, but it's real. I use this metaphor almost as if they're this combination between a germ and an insect. Like they're this little invisible thing. Soul crushers are just in the air around us. And if we can simply, and that's what, like, because they're there, we are sick, like our souls get infected and sick, and they thrive in dirty conditions where we allow them to thrive. So what we want to be able to do is clear them out and then create conditions by which they don't return. And too often and especially with younger generations, to be perfectly honest, I see people that expect leadership to solve that problem for them. They expect leadership to make their work fun. Like that's their job. When in fact, leadership's job is to keep the business operating and profitable. And true, we want to create great cultures and be great leaders and create that, but there's so much to do. And even with the best of intentions, when I was in a leadership role, all the time I would screw up, I would miscommunicate, I would not have time. I didn't have time to get you some of the stuff that we talked about in advance for this. Even with the best intentions, this happens. It
of
is
course.
not malicious. Nobody means to be rude about it. Like, there's a big difference between somebody being a jerk about something and somebody accidentally hurting somebody's feelings.
Sure.
And in the classic, we can't control what happens to us, but we can control how we react to it. That is the mindset that we have to adopt, that we have the power to make our work fun again and to create these conditions by which that chaos can be swirling around us. Chaos is not going to go away in business. To think there's some utopia of a company out there that exists that isn't messed up somehow.
Right.
That's not true. Collaboration is messy. And so how do we approach it that way from a mindset standpoint? That's part of it. And then how do we operate in a way, and this is what I do with the company, to help just make that less friction filled and easier to accomplish. And when you do that, the fun comes back, because we like actually doing the work that we do. We just don't like all the
other stuff
around it.
Yeah,
all the other stuff.
Yeah. What would be like a practical thing a team could do to kill the germs or clear the air?
I'll give one at an independent level and then one at a meta level. So in order to get rid of these germs, one thing honestly is assuming positive intent. And that's a great simple one that you can do. We are in a place and time where people take offense really easy to things. And some people use that to continue to poke, and that becomes malicious. But most of the time, offense wasn't intended. Offense was taken. And so if we assume positive intent, that we assume that everybody else in the group, that the clients that are driving us crazy with this request, or the executive leader who asked us to do something but didn't give us a clear brief, if we assume that they meant well, we then operate in a stronger, more proactive place of positivity, and we come up with better solutions. If we take offense at that and we grumble and we spend the first half of this meeting saying, man, we didn't even get a clear brief, or the client just says they want this and we don't even know why. If we take that attitude, we as a group will not come up with unique solutions. We won't enjoy the process. We won't find that fun. Everything slows down. We won't move as quickly. And so that's just something individually we can do. I can't make other people not take offense at something. I can only choose to do that myself, and therefore my experience has changed. With a group, when we want to affect that, that's where facilitation can come in very much. And a lot of the soul crushers that exist there have to do with the structure of collaboration. And that what a facilitator can do is come in and say, this is the outcome we're trying to do. This is the process by which we're going to do it, and create conditions where everybody in the room has their voice heard, that they actually are able to express themselves and react and come up with their own thinking versus just follow whoever talked loudest and first. And then that we are able to discuss it coherently in an order that makes sense, and then make an informed decision. And that's really important, because a lot of times we don't make that decision. We somehow expect a group of 10 people to make a decision. And if you've ever been to Disneyland, say with a group of more than 3 people, you always just end up getting in whatever line is in front of you because you've given up, or you walk around changing your mind 10 times. You show up and somebody's like, oh, I don't want to wait an hour for Space Mountain. So you walk across the park. I don't want to wait an hour for Splash Mountain. And then you walk. Meanwhile, you could have just picked one and stayed there. But it's a really important part of the process that you force a decision, and not everybody is going to agree on that decision, but the decision got made, and now we can disagree and commit and move forward. And making progress is soul crusher free. Not making progress breeds soul crushers.
Totally. Yeah.
Like,
then you
we
get that,
get frustrated.
angst
Sorry.
about the time that you have available to finish the project or
Right.
whatever. So a lot of these conversations that you're facilitating are creative in nature. Is that true? Like you're solving a problem?
Oftentimes it's funny, I just had this conversation with a friend of mine yesterday who is an executive coach for creative leaders. And so creativity became a big part of our conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And I hadn't thought of it that way, but creativity is at the core of a lot of what I do. And it
Mm-hmm.
was the actually the lead offer when I first started this company. I had formed it around this idea of building creative thinking skills. I think creativity and speed are probably the two biggest unfair advantages that you can develop in your career and
Mm-hmm.
as a team or as a company. If you can leverage creative thinking, you can think of ideas that other people won't, that will disrupt. Otherwise, you're always following. And if
Mm-hmm.
you can do that faster, that's a competitive advantage in the world today that is just going crazy with
Mm-hmm.
how fast change is happening. So both of those things are,
Advantages. Yeah.
yeah, advantages and what I help people with. It doesn't mean that it has to be somebody who necessarily self-identifies as I am solving a creative problem,
Sure.
because every problem to a degree, when
Mm-hmm.
you need a solution, is therefore a creative problem,
Sure.
because the solutions are where you're being creative. The
Mm-hmm.
problem is the problem. We, like when I was a creative director in the advertising world, the problem wasn't a creative problem. Our solution was creative. The problem was, how do I get more people to buy Energizer batteries and
Mm-hmm.
or choose Energizer over Duracell when the price was even higher, whatever
Yeah.
that might be? How do you create an irrational brand association or solve that problem?
Mm-hmm.
And then you solve it in a creative way by putting that out there.
Right.
But it doesn't always even have to be a storytelling kind of creative solution.
Mm-hmm.
There are lots of brilliant creative solutions to problems out there that are just thinking about it in a way that nobody else thought about it.
Yeah.
And I love it when you see that kind of thing happen.
Me too. Me too. And how would you say your background in advertising, like you were just referring to, and improv, how has that shaped how you facilitate and how you do the work you do?
There are a lot of facilitators out there. And so there's a lot of there are a lot of coaches out there, a lot of speakers
Yeah.
out there. We always have to think about what are our own unique, unfair advantages, like what is
Mm-hmm.
unique about ourselves that then you can leverage forward. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's it. At the end of the day, I look at myself as a unicorn in that I don't know anybody else with that same background of experiences. Used to perform on an improv team. I was a copywriter and a creative director in advertising. I then left that role to be an innovation consultant and trainer, is the best way I can describe it. I was working with a Swedish company that we were helping companies transform. And that's when I got into facilitation about 15 years ago. We were helping them transform. And that was totally different. And then I had a role that was part of the executive team at an advertising agency. And I continued to do workshops both internally and externally with senior executives.
Yeah.
And so I developed a lot of experience and a bit of a niche working with senior executives. For me, all of that pulls together. And then I think I specifically leverage fun and creativity, but with a ruthless focus on valuable outcomes.
Like a result. Yeah.
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 And that
You're very
result.
specific about your target.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think there are people who do the front part where they are focused on softer solutions, softer outcomes. And that can
Mm-hmm.
often be very valuable, by the way, team
Yeah.
building and
Mm-hmm.
creating culture and stuff like that. But certainly a lot of senior execs and accounting departments, procurement departments, CFOs, they care about those outcomes.
Yeah.
And when you can combine those such
Mm-hmm.
that we can get there, and in the process, as a happy byproduct of solving a really meaningful business challenge
Mm-hmm.
quickly, that's already valuable. And a happy byproduct of that is we had a lot of fun doing it. We developed more team bonding.
Yeah.
We built a better expression of growth mindset, and
Mm-hmm.
we grew as
As a result.
individuals.
Yeah.
That's
Oh, I
a
love
powerful
that.
combination, I think.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's like all of those focus areas in one, and it's like a multifaceted benefit package in a way.
Right.
So what role do you think humor plays in high stakes strategy sessions on boardrooms and other high stakes environments?
Humor is so underrated in the business context.
Yeah.
I think oftentimes people are afraid of using humor, and sometimes humor is even a strong and scary word. Lightheartedness or levity is a good word.
Yeah.
There's a couple great books about this, and I don't remember off the top of my head the authors' names, but I could find them later. Maybe we'll add them to the show notes if it's
Okay.
relevant, but people could Google them. There's a couple great ones. And in one of them specifically, I remember that they say actually the goal is levity, not so much humor. We're not
Mhm.
stand-up comics. We're not out here to say, what can I do to make Shannon laugh?
Yeah.
But creating a simple sense of levity, which is that we aren't taking ourselves so seriously,
Mhm.
actually
Mhm.
unlocks like a weird block people have in their brains
Yeah.
that we don't have access to our full brains if we're scared. And if fear is there, that I don't know if I can say this, I don't know
Mhm.
if I'm comfortable, I don't know if we've created a sense, or I don't know if I feel psychologically safe.
Yeah.
Nobody ever, by the way, says that to themselves, but we feel it.
We feel it.
We
Yeah.
feel it. We don't
Yeah.
use those words in our own
Sure.
internal
Sure.
monologue,
Yeah.
but we
Like we think about the
feel
consequence of saying what we want to say, and then very often we just don't say it
totally
because we don't know what the
all the
aftermath
time.
would be.
All the time. And that's a scary place to be if we have accidentally created conditions where people are not willing to speak up because they're worried or they're scared. We
Mhm.
have to create that psychological safety in the room, in the company, within our team, so
Mhm.
that people feel confident that they can say it out loud.
Yeah.
And humor and levity are one of the easiest shortcuts to telegraph that you're in a psychologically safe space.
Yep.
It just happens automatically.
Mhm.
And as soon as somebody, you, especially if they're in a leadership position, makes that first step and they establish the tonality of the room,
Mhm.
that
Yep.
this is going to be a lighthearted discussion, even though we're discussing something serious,
Mhm.
everybody else relaxes. Human beings, by their nature, mirror. And so we just relax into that space and we mirror that, and everybody else
Mhm.
is, and then it becomes this virtuous cycle.
Yeah.
But it works the opposite way too, where if suddenly somebody tries to make a little joke and is like, that's not appropriate for right now, or somebody shuts that down,
Mhm.
but let's talk about real stuff. Enough jokes. Let's talk about real stuff. Boom. Now nobody's going to feel safe there.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to
Yeah.
speak up. The quality of the ideas decrease.
Mhm.
The volume of the ideas decrease. Nobody's willing to contradict or challenge anybody, and
Yeah.
everything gets worse.
Do you have any
So
rules of the road for people who understand what you're saying but are afraid of being offensive or afraid of being like, because I know some clients who have intended to be humorous or provide levity, but they're actually being sarcastic
yeah,
and cutting, and then they've gotten feedback like, when you say things like that, it hurts people's feelings. So I'm just curious if you have any like tips.
it's a great question. So much of it, as with anything, comes from experience too. Like, we'll develop confidence when you do it, and you sometimes stumble upon stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And there's certainly been times where I've said something that offended accidentally, but it just came out the wrong way. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes that happens.
Yeah.
And you try not to. And then there's probably most definitely, not like how I just said that, probably most definitely times where early on, especially when people are feeling uncomfortable,
Yeah.
we tend to default to this humor at somebody else's expense. And
Mm-hmm.
that is certainly in a business context, probably in life, never the right way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
A much simpler rule of the road, to use your phrase there, that also aligns really well, I think, with the whole idea of returning on generosity is, where can you do that in an extraordinarily complimentary way?
Mm-hmm.
And like, I would much rather make a joke about the fact that I wish I could be like Shannon Cassidy and have a podcast with 8 gazillion, rabid fans or something. Now I'm just having fun with the fact that you have a very successful podcast with a lot of people, as opposed to ever doing something cutting or ever doing, even a lot of people avoid this by being self-deprecating. And I actually think that's a dangerous road too. It's better than
cutting on others.
cutting on other people, but it becomes dangerous because it rarely comes out as intended. And then when you're self-deprecating, what is somebody else meant to do about that?
Yeah, telling you that isn't
like
true.
Agree with you. And most of the time we'll say, oh no, it was really actually great. And I'm sure I did this when you were talking about the musical TED Talk earlier. I probably said something self-deprecating because that's my defense mechanism around that. But in general, it's much better just to have fun in a positive way. That isn't easy, but it's also where you're not really going for a joke. You're just going for
you're just
levity.
calling out what's happening in the room.
Being lighthearted about things and not precious about it. And compliments just go a long way. So if you are complimenting somebody else and making other people the star of the show, and that's a big improv rule, by the way, is it's making everybody else look brilliant. It's what can I do if my operating agenda in this meeting is to make everybody else in the room look as brilliant as possible, you will unintentionally make yourself look like the most brilliant person in the room, because everybody will feel like, what magic trick is this?
They're all like wanting to contribute and making adding value. I love that. And then I also think that an improv trick is to like use what happens in the room. So like if somebody's cell phone rings and just say like, it's that important that we're already getting calls coming.
Right. Exactly. I love that.
Yeah. So I think that's a good thing for leaders to practice. Just take a breath, just be in the moment. Don't overthink it. Cause I think, sometimes it's just like the attempt at being funny or clever is unfortunately the thing that ruins it sometimes. So just like being a little more in the moment, I think is a good rule of thumb.
Totally. And by the way, just for the show notes, I wanted to say that where I was getting that, the 2 books I was referencing, one is called Humor, Seriously, and it's by Jennifer Aker and Naomi Bagdonis. I might be mispronouncing. And there's another great one called Humor That Works by Andrew Tarvin.
Awesome. Thank you.
Just to cite my sources. Thank you, Internet. Actually, thank you, Kindle. I just pulled them up on my Kindle.
So you are a generous leader and you have witnessed generosity in your own career. You and I were chatting about that. What would be an example of a moment of generosity that you've experienced in your career?
Here's a great example. There was when I first made this transition from the world of advertising, where that's very much an escalator, where you have this, you're a copywriter and then you become a senior copywriter and then an associate creative director or creative director. Like you just do this and you always have to have that. And there's a way of modeling your career. 15 years ago or so, the whole industry was just being blown up by digital and the change. And I went to this workshop put on by a Swedish organization called Hyper Island, and who I later went to work for nearly a decade and for 2 years full time. But at the time, it was brand new, and I just went and I found the experience like mind blowing and eye opening. Just the level of clarity. I just thought everything about it was amazing. And the Swedish leader, a guy named Anders Sjöstedt, and I'm probably mispronouncing his last name, but I'm pretty close. For an American, I'm pronouncing that pretty close. Who's a good friend now. And he had moved from Sweden to start this, and he was solo. And I had just thought it was the coolest thing. And I was in New York and he was in New York. And so we would start getting together for breakfast, which is a fun, I love. One of the best aspects of when I lived in New York City is it's just easy to meet people for meals.
So easy.
In Los Angeles, if I want to meet people down the street, there's 2 hours of my day.
Yeah.
But in New York, it was really easy to just meet somebody near my train on the way in to the office. And so we started doing that once a month. And the mentorship and advice that I would get from him in that, and I probably was also helping return that. Like I was in his immediate audience, so I'm sure it was beneficial. But I certainly felt like at the moment I was squeezing a lot of extra value out for free from this experience that I just thought was amazing. I just took so much away from that. And then at one point, he was like, "Oh, you know what would be cool is if you, based on all this stuff that you've been doing in your job after this event, maybe if you came back and you did a talk on implementation." I was like, "Oh, that would be amazing. Now I have to go do the class again for free and talk at the end." And I did that for a few times. And then another aspect of generosity, one of the main speakers who had always been flying over from Sweden to do this section at the beginning, now I had gotten to know him more because we'd been part of 3 or 4 classes together. He said, "You could do what I do. You just do it your way." And he basically empowered me to do that section, which meant he wasn't getting the work of that gig. But of course, it was also very hard for him to fly over every single time. And then that led to more. And all these things led to something else. But it was always about giving that away.
Right.
And even in the content, I very freely, I always just say, if you see something in one of my slides, I appreciate it if you can cite me. But I'm also aware, I sometimes don't remember where I heard something. Like of the 2 books I mentioned earlier, I don't know which one mentioned which anymore.
Yeah.
And I remember both books are great. So please share.
There you go.
And that always leads to more. And there's just been a genuine truth that I can't track why this is true. But the more value you give away, it's very rarely a direct line. It comes back elsewhere in extreme multiples of value.
Yeah.
So you get a 10x ROI. The more I give away for free, the more that comes back. And anytime I've ever tried to be precious about an idea or precious about slides or go, I really should charge for this, it backfires. It reaches fewer people. It doesn't go as far. It's not as valuable to them.
Yeah, and it doesn't
give it away
feel the same.
Yeah. And so the more you give away for free, and I'm sure there are scientific reasons this is true.
I'm sure too. I don't know them either, but I agree with you.
Right. But yeah, the more you give away for free, the more people just assume that you are the expert on the topic and they don't have time to do it themselves. So they hire you.
Right.
Even though I just shared exactly how to do it.
I just gave you what I would do. Yeah.
Right.
Oh my gosh. That's brilliant. How about a time when you were generous to others? Because you've been generously focusing on how people have given to you and how you've benefited from that. But what about things that if you could just think back of something that, you didn't do it to get a return by any means, but it was something that was really fulfilling and you're glad you did it.
I think even going all the way back to when I first started in the industry, I was an assistant. I was it was actually my second job at the agency that I had, but I became the assistant to the creative department. So that was a big move for me because I wanted to be in the creative department. I'd start off as an account group assistant, which I learned a lot there, but it wasn't what I ultimately wanted to do. And as an assistant, you are like the lowest of the lowest on the totem pole at that point. And yet, weirdly, and this is a truth that I think anybody who sells or deals with B2B should know, is assistants actually are often the least respected and have the most amount of power because they control what everybody else gets. They are gatekeepers in a way. And I wasn't even consciously aware of this, and this was at an agency called Shy at Day, which it was in the 90s. We were the agency of the decade of the 90s. We were agency of the year several years. It was just an amazing period it was an awesome place to be for a 5-year period. And I was only in this role for about a year and a half, maybe. And it was a place everybody wanted to be. But I was the person that got the portfolios. That meant that I was the person that then gave them to other people. And that was a long setup. I apologize. But I have been told several times by people later that when they sent in, like they sent in their portfolios, or maybe they got to know me or something, and for whatever reason, I took it upon myself to say, oh, let me see who I can get this in front of. And I got the portfolio in front of other people. I had then had one person who's now a chief creative officer himself who says, I remember when you do that, and that because at that point they're students, like they have student portfolios, they don't
Sure.
have never had a job before,
Mhm.
and I don't even think that person got that job. One person in a similar role did. One person didn't even get that job, but they remembered the fact that I did that, and it helped their confidence, and it just helped them feel seen.
Yeah.
And then another one, I kind of did something similar. I don't think this person had a portfolio, but they were interested in the creative department, and they were just there that day. So I took them around and introduced them. It's like one of those things where you barely even remember what you did.
Right.
And this person decided creative was not right, and he wanted to be a producer, and then just has had an amazing career as a producer, and now an executive producer at some amazing places, and said that he traces it back to that day. And so when you hear
Yeah.
those things years
Yeah.
later, you realize the compounding power
Yep.
of simply being nice, because
Totally.
people would probably remember you if you weren't too.
Right. That's true. Yeah. And it's one of those, like, you don't have to do that, but you choose
Right.
to do it because you're like, well, why wouldn't I do that? And I think as a generous leader, it's like the default is like, why wouldn't I give them exposure? Why wouldn't I pass their
Yeah.
portfolio along? Right. I mean, I have the opportunity to do that. And like, I can't understand why I wouldn't do that. Right. Because it just like, I think as a generous leader, you don't think of it as generous. You just think of it as like what
The way
people
you do
do.
it.
Yeah.
Right.
And yeah.
Totally.
And I think
Totally.
it's helpful to use examples like that because it's not a monetary exchange. Because very often people think of generosity as philanthropy or some kind of like a financial giving. But on this podcast, we specifically talk about the kind you're talking about, which is opportunities and giving people feedback or giving
Right.
people exposure, and then also giving people gratitude, right? You're reflecting back on these stories and you're like, oh my gosh, I remember when that happened and it feels so good. There's like such a
Yeah.
ripple effect of it.
Can I tell one more story that I just
Sure.
thought of as we were
Yeah.
talking? And this is another one where we had an event last summer where a bunch of facilitators were coming. We're all part of a single community, and a bunch of facilitators were coming to LA for this event. And I think I was the only one based here in Los Angeles. So everybody else was coming here. And it was one of those same things where I just said, does anybody need a ride to the event? Because I'm here. We did two things. One was I formed a little like meetup the night before going, hey,
Mhm.
maybe we can meet each other before the thing. Let's grab dinner, and organized it because I was here. And even for that one, I said, who needs a ride to this? And then who needs a ride to the event? And one person in particular, my friend Monica, that she came to the event, and I gave her a ride to the dinner, and we got to know each other there. I gave her a ride to the event. And it's a tiny little thing, but it's because you do that, you form a strangely deeper bond than people I just met at the event because we carpooled. And then later on, this is just a weird way it works. And so now we've become big fans of each other and better friends as a result of that. And certainly that's its own value in being able to help each other out. But then she was running something where she was just challenging facilitators to be more active on LinkedIn. And I felt like I was pretty active on LinkedIn. I've been there, but weirdly, I felt busy at the time, but I wanted to support her initiative. This is like me going, okay, I'll help you out. And I'll support it by committing to do the challenge myself. And then during that 2-week challenge of posting every day, it had forced me to come up with something. And one of those posts went what I'll call LinkedIn viral. It's not like TikTok viral. It's not like millions of people, but I ended up adding probably 3,000 followers on LinkedIn because of that one post. Because I really wanted to make Monica's initiative powerful because I have, you know what I mean? It's like this weird, this leads to this leads, it's a domino effect or butterfly effect or whatever.
Yeah.
But that's another good example of a tiny little thing, just offering people a ride or something.
Right. You offer a ride, you build a relationship, a genuine relationship, and then you're trying to help her out with something that she's doing and it ends up benefiting you. Right. And you're like, how did this happen? Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. This podcast is a result of that. And long story short is my friend Susie, who I met at Heroic Public Speaking. I told her I wanted to do a podcast. She said, I used to be in broadcast and I have a podcast business. And then she helped me get on my feet. for the first a
amazing.
long time. Yeah.
That's amazing.
And she's been a shepherd. Yeah. And it was just one of those, like, she tried to just be generous to me, and then I get to be generous to others. It's this whole beautiful ripple effect.
It's really powerful.
Yeah. So a couple rapid fire questions if you
Sure.
are up for it. Okay. So creativity or strategy, what's your first love?
It's a great question. I'm going to say creativity, but that's because I want to be able to inject creativity into the strategy. It does work the other way too. I think if you have a strategic focus, that's going to make your creativity better. So I love all my children the same.
Both. Yeah, exactly. The yin and the yang. Okay.
Yes.
Most soul crushing phrase that you've heard in a meeting. This is the only negative question, by the way.
The most soul, I'm sure there's a ton of these. I think probably the most soul crushing thing I can think of is let's regroup on this.
Oh,
might be the most soul crushing thing. Let's regroup on this, which it's like what you really mean is we just wasted the last hour and we have to just do it again.
Offline. We're going to take that offline.
Yeah.
You know,
there's a lot of things that are
now.
like that. And there probably are other things that are worse where somebody expresses something that just shuts down a thought. I find that to be soul crushing.
Yeah.
And also just complaining, which isn't like a one thing somebody says, but any time you're collaborating and the first half is actually complaining about the circumstances that you're in, you're not setting the second half up for success.
Right. Like, wouldn't that be nice if we could do that, but we are never going to get the budget for this.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you're already like shut it down before you begin.
There's a lot of that. Why are we doing this when the stakeholder, this important person isn't even here, or I guess he's late again, or there's just a lot of that. It just sets the wrong tone. And I've certainly been guilty of falling into that. It can feel like venting, which feels psychologically satisfying and fulfilling when you're frustrated and somebody else is frustrated and you have a chance to vent that. But it's not ultimately in my own best interest to do so.
Right. Yeah. So having that self-control. So what's a go-to way that you use to spark creativity?
My favorite go-to way to spark creativity is an activity that I call a question storm. And it's like a brainstorm, but you are only allowed to ask questions and you're not allowed to worry about what the answers are yet. And you only need maybe 3 to 5 minutes. But if you have something, if you wanted to say, what could I do to help make this podcast reach 3 times as many people? That's your little challenge. And you just start asking questions. What people am I talking about? What am I doing already? What things have I never thought of? Are there people with a bigger audience that I could become friends with? That's almost a solution in the form of a question, which you shouldn't do. But in the instance of that, that's one way that an idea just manifests itself to you. It's crazy how those open-ended questions lead to other open-ended questions.
Yeah. And do people ask them out loud? Because I've heard you talk about using Post-it notes.
Yeah, in that sense, I'm just using it as it's for me.
Just for you.
Designed
just
to do it, just free associating.
Put yourself in a question storm. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a great
I actually like, even if I'm doing it with a group, I think that particular one and many activities, by the way, work better when you have people work individually for 3 minutes or 5 minutes and then share out the best of the best. Because if we try to do it as a group, inevitably 2 or 3 people out of the 7 or 10 talk.
Dominate. Yeah, for sure.
Just because different people's brains work differently.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. So last question is an improv rule that you wish other leaders followed.
Listen, that's probably the best one.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wish they followed all of them, to be perfectly honest, but listening is, some leaders are really gifted at it and others are not. But that's definitely one that I wish people would be better active listeners.
Yeah, really curious. Oh, I love that. Oh, thank you so much for sharing this time with us.
Thank you, Shannon. This was a
such
pleasure.
Thanks for listening to ROG, Return on Generosity Podcast. Please help us grow by subscribing and reviewing us on your favorite podcast player. And for more information, visit bridgebetween.com. We grow when we give.
우리는 나누면서 성숙합니다.
We grow when we give.
On rayonne quand on donne.
We grow when we give.